Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm joined by, again, almost a veteran of the channel here, Alina, to talk about all things Germany and the World Cup. I certainly did not have in mind that we'll be talking about Germany this early on in the competition, but it looks like we're talking about a lot of crash outs out of the World Cup already. Alina, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, thanks. I also wouldn't have expected to talk about Germany again this early, and just remember being like on the episode before the World Cup kicked off. What did we say about Germany will go? Like knockout stages definitely, but did
Yeah.
we say final? Did we say quarterfinal? Was I a bit critical? Can't remember, but definitely not crashing out after the group
Yeah.
stages.
As critical as we were, I don't think group stages was the conversation. I think quarterfinals was the minimum what we gave them, which would
Yeah, I
kind
think
of
so.
would be what you expect given the quality that they have.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
we saw a lot of mistakes, a lot of faults in the group stages, and I think something that you specifically highlighted in the preview discussion was Germany cannot experiment with positions. This is something that we've seen them do prior to the Euros. Thankfully, in some ways, it kind of worked out for the Euros for them for various reasons, and the opposition was a little bit different to what they were getting in the World Cup. Post Euros, again, there was a little bit more experimenting, and it was like, right, that experimenting is going to probably not happen at the World Cup. We saw them lose to Colombia, draw to Korea at the end. They were not able to get enough points, not score enough goals really to break a margin. They finished third in their group. We've seen Morocco and Colombia go through. I mean, what a moment for both of these nations. But for Germany here, it's a time to reckon and consider a lot of things. Let's start off with the Korea game. What are the certain mistakes that you saw happen in the Korea game that were kind of similar mistakes that we'd seen from game one?
Yeah, I think I would start at the back with the defensive line, where at the Korea game, also due to injuries, but also due to like squad selection prior to the World Cup, where you like only played with two center backs and two players on the outer like sides, on the outer flanks, kind
Yeah.
of that were supposed to be fullbacks, but aren't like natural, so to say, fullbacks. Chantal Hagel as left back, who is a midfielder who happens to be left-footed,
Yeah.
and Svenja Hood, who is really, really well known for being a key player in offense, making great key passes into the final third,
Mm.
to the attacking third, being clinical for the attacking play of Germany on the right wing, but not at right back. And that's where she ended up due to a very strange experiment, I would say. And that's also an experiment that started like shortly before the World Cup. It's not like that
Yep.
she had a lot of time to adjust to the new position.
Hmm.
And I think, of course, in the modern football system, you would want to have fullbacks who are dynamic, who can keep up with the pace of the young strikers that we see in these
Hmm.
tournaments. And I think that might have been the key factor why Svenja Hood ended up there, being really pacey, being a really pacey winger.
Yeah.
But I still think that she lacks a bit the physicality, the physical presence at the back, like other fullbacks, like a natural fullback would have. And I think that's
Mm.
kind of where it started. And I think maybe also obviously with the right back position, it's difficult. But I think that was really Germany's like weak spot.
Yeah.
Obviously, you had someone like Sophia Kleinherrn, who was a really experienced defender on the bench, who could have played left back, who could have played right back. She saw 0 minutes on the pitch. I don't understand
Mm.
why. Then you have Maximiliane Reyer from FC Bayern, who wasn't even selected for the whole squad, although she played a really good season for
Mm.
Bayern at right back. So I think that's one of the main points. And I think in midfield, there were a lot of misunderstandings and how to play together, how to get the ball forward, how to pass it into the final third again. I think the link-up play between offense and midfield wasn't really good.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you would just rely on Alexander Popp in attack to score headers. You saw it in the South Korea game. At the end, they just played long passes forward, hoping she would score a header from them, and that's not how we approach such a crucial game.
Yeah, and I think you really kind of described it in a nutshell there, and the emphasis on the fullbacks was very funny because, well, not too funny for Germany, but after the game had concluded, the Korean head coach came out and said we were going after their fullbacks because they're really great players, but they're not fullbacks.
Exactly. I
So
think that really hit it on the nail, and I think it's also quite astonishing that you like have a better analysis of the game from the opponent head coach than from the own head coach. From Martina Voss-Tecklenburg, you wouldn't hear anything like that, and I really feel like that in the German camp there's a lack of self-criticism and a lack of reflection on the own mistakes.
Yeah, because if you kind of reflected and addressed the issues, then you'd probably come out with your actual fullbacks and surprise Korea, where Korea is like, oh, this is not the set of fullbacks we were trying to see, but it's still Huth in the back. And you kind of mentioned a little bit of that flow play in the middle, and it's obviously hard to assume like if Huth had played in the middle, but again, given her last season and just really where her natural position is, and again, we've seen head coaches play players out of position, but sometimes that's not the position they master. And in fact, that's exactly where teams target you. Like this is kind of known, and I love how head coaches are pretty brutal and honest about it. But going back to Huth, I mean, had she slotted in the midfield, and I think there was a lot of issues even to address about the midfield. But do you think natural players being in that midfield, the likes of Huth, would have maybe helped that creativity a little bit? Because we saw, or I definitely saw a bit of like stump of creativity against Colombia, where they're like almost forcing the play, especially against Korea, where they definitely needed to score. But it was like they just couldn't get that creativity going. It was like, what's next? It's like they were a little bit nervous even in how to build up. Is that kind of thing, in the midfield was a bit of worry where you're taking some of these players and putting them elsewhere. And then now you're hitting both the back line and the midfield.
Yeah, there's a lot of what ifs, but I think
Mm-hmm.
it's difficult to obviously I think they took over a lot of tactics from the Euros, and there you obviously play different teams, different opponents, and what worked at the Euros might not work as well at the World Cup because it's a completely different setting, and players, especially like relying on so many players from Wolfsburg who have played in every competition until the very last, and they made it to the German Cup final, to the Champions League final. Obviously, they have so many minutes in their legs, and I feel like they were like a bit outpowered, so I should say, a bit tired. I mean, you always need to keep in mind what an incredible workload they had,
Mm-hmm.
and then to perform again at this high level is incredible from them. But I think it would have been really good to introduce some younger players to the biggest stage right now at the World Cup. Like, and you have all these young players: Laura Freigang, Nicole Njomi, Silke Nüsken, who just signed for Chelsea, Sophia Kleinherne, Sydney Lohmann, of course, for Lohmann and Nüsken, there were some injury concerns, so that's why they entered the tournament a bit later. But I think if you give these players a chance, if you put trust in them, these are the ones who will represent Germany within the next 5 years on the biggest, like in the biggest tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
It won't be the likes of Hood and Pop, because at some point they will retire from the German national team. So I think it would have been a good thing to introduce the younger players, the upcoming talents, and like give them the trust to prove themselves. Of course, it won't work 100% well, but you can still see like where to make changes, where to improve things, and they can make their first experiences, which they would definitely learn a lot from. And I think that would have been a good experiment. That would have been a much better experiment than putting Svenja Huth to right back. And I think that's where you really kind of lack the German will for being innovative, like trying out new things. That's like a German mentality, relying on things that you already know, things that have worked well in the past, and you could really see that shine through right now. And obviously, it didn't work.
Yeah.
So
Definitely an aspect of stubbornness, and I think this is a conversation that this World Cup is highlighting more than ever, is that this is an era shift of a lot of the older players where introducing the younger players is key. And I think it's really funny because, well, it's not too funny again, but the teams that are being knocked out or crashed out are coming in and lining up with some of the highest averages of players, which is great. You need that experience at a World Cup, but who's winning it for you? It's the youth. It's this talent that not only you're developing, but it's talent for a reason. So you need to kind of trust them. And I think not only were they just relying on Pop, but they were skipping a lot of the talent that was already there. And so like even you don't even need to look at the stats, but just watching the game, specifically the Korea one, I believe Germany had recorded something along the lines of like 21 crosses, 17 of which were from open play. Now, from 21 crosses, 17 from open play, they scored one out of Pop. And Pop could only do so much. Like she's kind of scored 4 out of their 8 goals. She was defending from her back. Like she in some ways she did what she needed to do, where it's like, right.
yeah, definitely. I mean, she's
Involve
an incredible player. She's done so much for the German national team, for German women's football overall. And of course, it makes sense to rely on her for scoring the goals, and you need her leadership, you need her qualities in attack. But to some extent, you really need to wonder what happens if she's not there anymore, if she retires from the German national team, who will score the goals? And if you don't introduce the new goal scorers for Germany, like, when do you want to do that? And who do you rely on when Alexander Popp can't score the goals anymore? So that's definitely a big question mark, I would say.
It's $1 million question because I mean they've got Leah Schuler. She was in there. She was making line breaks, making runs, but it didn't look like the team was targeting her. And I think again, you mentioned stubbornness, you mentioned not addressing the problems because it was cross after cross. It doesn't matter how many crosses you have, it matters about the quality. So I think this is a hard question to probably answer now, but moving forward, there's the Olympics. Shortly after, there's the Euros. They're going to get different opposition, and I think this is where a lot of the European teams are struggling. Is that the Euros is different than the World Cup? Like you're facing the likes of Morocco and Colombia. You're not facing the likes of Austria and I don't know, Switzerland. Like it's different ball game. So I guess for Germany ahead, and maybe there's leadership questions. Do you think there's a sacking coming her way? Because this could be the question for a lot of head coaches now. And now this is not something you have to answer necessarily because it's a tougher question. But moving forward, this is the first time they've been knocked out of the group stages of the World Cup. There's Olympics coming up. There's, like I mentioned, the Euros. They've got the talent, they've got the quality, they've got the structure. There's no doubt in that whatsoever. It's figuring it out on the pitch. So what happens next from now?
Yeah, it's difficult to predict if there is a sacking coming. Obviously, Martina Voss-Tecklenburg extended her contract before
Mm,
the World Cup, but if you look at her record with the German national team, it's not that successful. At the World Cup in France 2019, they exited against Sweden in the
mm,
quarterfinals, failed to qualify for the Olympics, obviously. Then they had this kind of big rebirth at the Euros where they made it to the final. That sparked so much joy here in Germany. It created really a hype around the team, and now exiting for the first time at the World Cup after the group stages, that's really tough, and that should definitely make people think. But I think from what I've heard so far in the media reports, Martina Voss-Tecklenburg has the full backing from the German FA. And obviously with the Nations League coming up and everything,
mm.
it's difficult to say or like to really clearly say, oh, she will be sacked
Yeah.
anyways, because there's a lot of important things coming up for the national team. So on the one hand, I can see her being sacked, but on the other hand, I don't believe it that clearly. You obviously need to like think about a successor, who's there, who could
Mhm.
replace her. And obviously you also have to think about like are there any players that will retire from the national team potentially, and I think that's a lot of unanswered questions floating around, and I think a lot will be discussed behind closed doors, and then you will obviously eye the Nations League and then see how it goes. But
Mhm.
I don't think that she will be sacked, although I would think it would be good in some aspect to have a bit of a
Yeah.
fresh start, have new faces on the sidelines and on the pitch for Germany, because I
Yeah.
think that's what they need, a bit of a generational like change.
Hmm. A transitional period really is what they need to go
Definitely.
through, which is not an easy thing. And federations often
Absolutely not.
shy away from transition moments. And like you said, she leaves, who's a successor? But as odd as it sounds, yes, the Euros were is a bit of an outlier, which is not something you would be expecting to say from Germany. And I think maybe we've been particularly a bit critical here, but if there was a player that not necessarily stood out for you, but certainly was the spark of the team, regardless of the not so many sparks that we saw, who would it be from the German squad that we saw? Because I think there was a few players that certainly did what they needed to in terms of they've just followed the game plan that they were given. But who's a player either from the younger ones or the older ones that kind of actually when came on was a bit of a spark, and it's like, right, this is the player that we kind of need to be building here for the future.
Um, yeah, based on the South Korea game, I would definitely go with Sydney Lohman here.
Mm-hmm.
Who really like brought the creativity to the game that was really lacking. Obviously, she's been injury prone in the past, so it's difficult to like really establish her in the starting 11 to really like build on her as a key player. You
Mm-hmm.
obviously need to manage her minutes, but I think there's a lot of players that can let this creative spark. Sjöke Nüsken, if you would finally play her in midfield and not a centre back. Laura Freigang, if you would give her a bit of freedom in the playmaking position. I think Clara Bühl, who obviously is already part of the starting 11, has done a great job on the wings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Jule Brandt, the more experience she will gain over the bigger tournaments, the better she will get. And I mean, right now she's already like the youngster of the team, won the Golden Girl Award, and I think there's a bright future ahead for her.
Yeah.
She showed what she has, like in terms of quality, and I think there's more to come, but she definitely needs to gain more experience, and I think that's the case for a lot of the younger players.
Yeah, for me, she was a bit of a cheat code, which is kind of why I hope Germany are able to clinch that Olympic spot and kind of use it to actually write. This is not a farewell for pop. This is not a farewell for X, Y, and Z. Like, football is brutal. You can't give the farewells that you want. Like, we've seen it. Marta Sinclair literally crashing out in the worst possible manner at this World Cup that's supposedly their last. We can get indulged in the emotions and the storylines, and we absolutely love storylines. But
Me
football
too.
doesn't care about storylines.
Yeah, I would have wished for like a better like story like for Alexandra Popp, obviously, because she would have deserved to like go far with Germany and lead them to a potential World Cup final. And it's the same for Svenja Hood, because I think we all know that they don't have a lot of
Time.
years left in the German national team. So you wish for them to have like a happy ending and maybe
Mm-hmm.
even with a title. I mean, obviously in the next years there's still chances for titles, but you shouldn't like exaggerate it, because at some point it's enough. At some point it's fine. At some point the time is over. But
Yeah.
I think it's really about figuring out when that time is, when the youngsters will like really come through and take their spots. Yeah, Germany obviously I think enters the tournament having this weight on their shoulders as being seen as favorites, doing
Mm-hmm.
so well in the Euros, having all these star players like Alexander Popp, Lena Oberhof in their ranks.
Yeah.
So I think especially for younger players, it might have been difficult to handle this pressure. The experienced players, obviously, they know how to deal with it, but I think the younger players not being given minutes and then having so much pressure on the shoulders, really wonder
Yeah.
how that like affected their performances. And obviously, Jule Brandt playing her first World Cup, starting against South Korea, there must have been so much pressure on her.
Mm.
And I think at some point it really showed that she struggled. So I think in her case, might have been better to start her from the bench. And I think generally, if we look at how the German squad has developed since the Euros, and that's one of the biggest things that I would criticize, is that I think Martina Voss-Tecklenburg hasn't succeeded to find a system where every player can like play up to their strengths in favor of the sporting success of the team. You
Mm-hmm.
have so many talented players. You have so much squad depth. Of course, you can't make everyone happy. You can't
Yeah.
put everyone in the starting 11, but still you can find a way. You can find a way to make a system where everyone can showcase their strengths, so everyone can play on their preferred positions. And
Mm-hmm.
if you play a player out of position, then make it as little player like as a little like
Of a change, I guess.
pardon?
A little of a change, I guess. You don't want it to be too
Yeah,
drastic.
like don't play too many players out of position. That's what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Like having two fullbacks, like who aren't fullbacks, that's too much. If you have like one player in defense who might be played off position, couldn't be covered in some way. But it's like don't play too many players out of position.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you can change the system, make it adaptable, be flexible.
Yeah.
Look at your opponents, like adapt to them in a bit of a way, try out new things. That's what I
Yeah.
really like about the German team. You have so many exciting talents in the squad that didn't get to show themselves, that didn't get to present themselves. You want to see them play. Let them play, honestly. Find a way and change the system. Don't stick to the system. The system isn't fixed. It can be changed.
Yeah.
And that's the beautiful thing about football, that football is developing, that you can showcase so many different things, that you have such a great pool of talents. Everyone brings something different to the pitch, and you
Mm-hmm.
want to see that. And Germany didn't bring that to the pitch during the World Cup, sadly.
Yeah, agreed. Like you mentioned, football is not fixed. Systems shouldn't be fixed either. And those are tough questions that I think, again, teams need to be brutally honest with themselves. You can't be too stubborn. Looks like stubbornness is the downfall of so many of those nations, like particularly Canada. And I've touched on them in an earlier episode. Like, it was just stubbornness on and off the pitch, but just stubbornness is the kryptonite for these teams. I'm not gonna ask for a prediction for a World Cup winner, because it feels like every prediction we make, the complete opposite go away. But I feel like now that we've kind of concluded the group stages, is a team that maybe in some way surprised you. Don't give me predictions. They might get knocked out in the round of 16, which is fine. But a team that, like, I guess you and probably many others, were not expecting to do what they did.
Yeah, I think generally media coverage is really like focused on the European national team. So it's always great to see teams from Asia, from Africa, from South America to go far in the tournament and show what they can, or like teams like Jamaica and Colombia, obviously, Japan as well, who you shouldn't obviously underestimate, like having won the title in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's just a shame that there's so little coverage about these teams, because I think they have great stories to tell on and off the pitch. They have great talents within their ranks, and also Morocco, what a story for them. And I think that's really nice to see with this World Cup. that these teams get to showcase their qualities and make it to the knockout stages. And there's so many historical moments to celebrate, and it's just great to see. And I hope they go further in the tournament, because based on the performances that we've seen so far, it's what they deserve.
Yeah, tell their stories. You know, the Sinclair Martha stories are unfortunately on hold, but there's other stories to tell now. Alina,
Definitely.
I appreciate you so much for joining me. Where can people follow up all Germany things? I don't think you'll be too busy talking about Germany now. Probably when the front Bundesliga rolls out again. But how
Yeah,
can people
definitely.
be, following? I'm sure you're going to be extremely busy when the season kicks off.
Yeah, definitely. You can find me on Twitter as always, at Alina_RXP.
Boom. I'll leave all the links down below on the screen. Definitely make sure to go ahead and follow. Let us know your thoughts on Germany. Certainly not the prediction that we had. I probably had them going through to the final, as many did. But this is the 2023 Women's World Cup. It's an era shift, it's an era change, and we're just in it for the chaos and the shenanigans. And I'll see you later.